Hey everybody, on today's show I have Josh, and he has been very busy creating all sorts of new species for D&D. So if you want to spice up your adventure and you want them, maybe your characters want to play something like a Medusa, that's all in the interview ahead. So stick around, that interview starts now. You've created some new playable species, which I think is a proper term nowadays.
Yes.
And why don't you tell me all about that?
All right. Let's see. I've been creating species for a little over a year now, year and a half maybe. So I've done probably close to around 18 different ones, I think, at this point. The most recent ones are the bundle I call Skin Deep, which is all Greco-Roman or Greek myths inspired. So we've got a Medusa, a playable Medusa species, as you say, is the proper term these days. We've got Nymphs, and we've got Cupids. And Medusa is more or less a pretty straightforward conversion from the monster manual. We've got your Medusa stat block, and I just broke it down to where it would hopefully not be too overpowered. Levels up from first, then third, then fifth level as you advance. You unlock some extra powers. Then, since both the Ravnica setting and the Saros setting have their own different variants on Medusas, I get variant versions within the product too. Nymphs is 8 different subspecies, really 12 if you count the Theros variants, because, of course, Theros is not Greek myths. It's only very loosely inspired by. They are almost elementals, whereas traditional nymphs are very standard fed. The dryad out of the monster manual is a nymph, and that's actually what drove me to create a playable nymph, was that the nymphs don't really exist in 5th edition as a stat block. The 2nd edition, 3rd edition, everybody, we always had nymphs before, and they were god tier, at least like CR8, CR10, like mid-tier powerful beings could kill with a glance. That wasn't what I was going for, but the dryads in 5th edition have their charm ability and their tree stride ability, and I was like, okay, what if we take the tree stride off of them and give charm to a bunch of different types, and then flavor each one of those types appropriately. And then we've got Cupids, which are, as you might imagine, can charm with a weapon attack. So they just inherently can take whatever weapon they're wielding, and if they hit you, you become charmed by the closest creature you can see. Your traditional Valentine, arrow in the heart kind of thing.
How long does it take you to develop something like this?
Oh gosh, it varies. For something like Cupids, that's a really straightforward one. It took me probably 2 or 3 days of work, really. Nymphs took me, I probably worked on that off and on for 3 weeks or more, because it was 8 types, 4 variants, which the variants are just like swap out one ability and give them an elemental attack, because that's what Theros does. But also all of the lore. I'm interested in getting it more or less mythology accurate, but also suggesting ways you can work that into a D&D setting or whatever, your homebrew setting is. There's an introduction that discusses what nymph culture is like, the ecology entry that we would have had in older editions. But then I added on to the end since these are so tied to Greek mythology and didn't have a stat block in this edition, I made a page on, here's how people in Forgotten Realms might view them. It was a fair amount of writing, and also a fair amount of digging through illustrations. I use public domain sources like Wikimedia Commons, Creative Commons, things like that, for both cover illustrations and interior spot illustrations. And finding 18th, 19th century paintings to illustrate what I want to see can be tricky, especially when you're talking about something like nymphs that are so frequently eroticized that it's hard to find things that will comply with DM skill standards.
Yeah, I guess it's probably hard to find it with their clothes on.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But the cover image that I put on it is very clearly nude, but all of the naughty bits are facing away or, covered by water or something. And yeah, so I had to do that, for like 6 different illustrations throughout the book, just tracking down the right stuff. And that's one of the things I have a lot of fun with, is working within those limitations. I'm selling like $2 and $3 products here. Like I I want to support artists. I would love to be able to fund artists, but I can't commission a $50 painting for a $2 product. So it has working within the constraints of, oh, I'm going to spend sometimes 2 or 3 days hunting for illustrations and finding the ones that work and the ones that look good when they're shrinking down onto a little size of a paragraph kind of illustration. It could be a lot of challenge and a lot of fun playing with that to make it an attractive product as well as an interesting one.
Yeah, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? So you're trying to find all the right pieces to fit into the right spots and making sure that
Yep.
it all looks good. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's great. I love the idea of additional player options in the
Yeah.
game. And as I mentioned earlier, folks were like, "Can I play this or that?" And I'm like, I don't have any of the stat blocks for that. I guess I could do it myself, but it's great when we have folks like you flesh some of that stuff out. I also really love that you have written some backstory in there to fit it into various settings, so that way it makes sense.
Yeah.
So very important stuff, and that was probably harder than actually creating the species in some cases.
Yeah. Mechanics, especially balancing mechanics, can be pretty challenging sometimes. But yes, getting suggestions for how to work something into a setting is both a challenge and a lot of fun. With Medusas, actually, that's an interesting one. They have changed so much in pop culture from their origins that I wanted to honor the Monster Manual version and the most ancient legend version, while also bringing in like references to I don't know if they appeared in third edition, but I know back in second edition we had the Madar, the male Medusa equivalent. And so I didn't want to make that its own subspecies, or because they weren't very flavorful. They were just immune to petrification, so they could actually mate or whatever. But they didn't like really do things specific. So it was a situation where I was like, okay, like most Medusae are female and they're a parthenogenetic species, so we don't need a male to reproduce. If you want to play a male member of the species, some people call them Madar. And I just dropped that little hint from an old edition. And that actually gets into something that I did in Nymphs too, which was I try to be gender neutral with all of these, referring to them as they and whatnot. But in Nymph, the word itself means bride or young woman. So it was like I just stuck with the she pronoun. And in the setting portion, I said, here's why I did this. And if you want to play as a male nymph, there's plenty of examples in Greek mythology of gender non-conforming, and even there's one example I can think of that was literally a non-binary nymph. Like they were ASAB, but objected to being referred to as a woman. That's a great example to build off of if you look at the old mythology and want to play something outside of the traditional mold. I wanted to bring up those options, that you can imagine whatever you want to play for these characters, even though they are strongly identified with their gender.
It gets a tricky bit when you're looking at some of this older stuff because you have to conform it to newer standards.
Yeah.
Or more acceptable standards. So it's one of those things that has to be done. But from the standpoint of, obviously you're a D&D player, are you a forever DM like I am?
Yes, for the most part, I won't say forever. Sadly, I have not been playing a lot of D&D lately. I've been playing other games, but for D&D, I have primarily been a DM the past quite a few years.
What was the first species you ever played?
Oh gosh, that's almost certainly an elf. It's been so long. I've been playing 30 some years now, but I always loved elf. And going back to Red Box Edition D&D, when elf was a class. That's why I fell in love with them, in part because of the nature aspect. I've always loved that, but also because they were a fighter wizard blend. So you get to cast spells and use a sword. Like what's better than that?
I was a dwarf guy myself, still am actually.
Yeah.
But I think it also harkens back to Tolkien. Right? If you read Lord of the Rings, or before I ever played D&D, I always loved the idea of the dwarves and the elves and everything else, but it was just one of those things that kind of caught my fancy. So when I played the Red Box, I played a dwarf. So this bundle is going to be available, or is available now?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, been out a couple of 2-3 months now.
I will have links down below, so that way if you're spicing up your game with some additional species, this is available right now for you to get your grubby little hands on. And Josh, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.